this is just a very brief crash course in some immigration legal pathways for Afghan nationals. And just caveat, I'm going to do this very quickly as an overview, and I'm going to leave out a lot of the nuances and all these forms of relief and pathways I'm talking about, as well as not get into in depth in a lot of pathways that might be possible for some individuals. But these are the key mechanisms through which Afghan nationals who are currently at risk abroad, as well as a major pathway for Afghan nationals who are here in the United States, could access immigration channels to safety. So the four main categories of relief or of status / access to US territory that I'm going to talk about are the US Refugee Admissions Program, two priority categories of relevance to Afghan nationals, special immigrant visas, humanitarian parole, and asylum. And each of these is, with an N plus an other catch-all care category. Each of these has varying definitions technically within immigration law, but I'm going to provide just hopefully a quick overview on the scope. So the US Refugee Admissions Program is the program through which the United States government resettles refugees who are identified and screened from abroad. The program, called US RAP in short, was created through the 1980 Refugee Act. Notably, this is the same piece of domestic legislation that created our domestic asylum system, which is a way that refugees who are already present in the United States can access protection and status. But the US Refugee Admissions Program happens abroad in several component parts. Department of State and Department of Homeland Security are involved, as well as in later stages, the International Organization for Migration, which is an international body. The president every year in consultation with Congress designates the refugee admissions number ceiling for each year. The cap for this year, fiscal year 2021, which ends at the end of this month, sorry, I had to think about that, it's September, ends at the end of this month, is 62,500. We'll have a new cap for fiscal year 2022. When people come and are resettled through the US Refugee Admissions Program, there are a few key things that happen. First, they can bring their spouse and their children over, also as refugee, through refugee admissions. And once resettled here in the United States, they can access cash benefits and medical assistance. They're eligible for Medicaid and other benefits once here, resettled in the United States. Also, once here in the United States, they're eligible for work authorization. And then importantly, this is a pathway that does create, this is a program that does create a pathway for permanent residence and US citizenship. So refugees admitted through US RAP are eligible for green card after 1 year and for US citizenship after 5 years. This is a graph, I guess, flow chart of the many steps that go into US refugee resettlement. I'll talk more about the P2 group, which is particularly important. P1, these P1, P2, P3 are different priority categories that have been designated by the US government. P2, we'll wait for next slide on that. P1 is when the individual is referred directly to US RAP by UN High Commissioner for Refugees or by the US Embassy, or in certain cases, a designated NGO. But P2 will be more relevant for most of the Afghan nationals who will be channeled through this program. Once there's lengthy security checks that take typically many months or even on the scale of years that are initiated as soon as there's a referral through the priority programs. The first step is with the Department of State, with the consulates abroad, which help prepare the case and screen the case. Then it's actually the Department of Homeland Security, US Citizenship and Immigration Services that will adjudicate the refugee status petition. USCIS, the refugee officers within USCIS will reach a decision. If there's a denial, there's an opportunity to request review of that adjudication internal within USCIS. If there's an approval, the approval will be contingent on security clearances. Additionally, after approval, there's medical screening and orientation, and finally, a resettlement of the individual to the United States, usually in coordination with the International Organization for Migration. So this is a very lengthy process with numerous agencies having to coordinate with each other. The Priority 2 program is a program through which the majority of at-risk Afghan refugees are able to access the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. Again, U.S. RAP Priority 1 is limited to those referred directly by UNHCR or U.S. embassies. For Priority 2, these individuals are eligible if they have been employed with U.S. government-funded programs or projects supported through a U.S. government grant or cooperative agreement. Of note, employees of subcontractors of those U.S. grant-funded programs are not eligible for this P2 program. Also eligible are employees of US-based media organizations or US-based NGO governmental organizations, and also employees who would have been eligible through the special immigrant visa channel, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but who did not work for those employers for a year or more, which is one of the eligibility criteria for the SIV visas. People who may be eligible through US RAP Priority 2 cannot apply directly to this program. They have to be referred through their employer, and the Department of State has issued guidance saying that the referral has to happen through the highest ranked US citizen employee for a media organization or through the US NGO's US-based headquarters. There's not, last I checked, there wasn't current guidance on a grant-funded program, US government-funded program or contractor. But typically, this stage of having to get the referral through the employer has been the bottleneck for a lot of people who would be otherwise eligible. So special immigrant visas, this is a category of permanent protection or green cards / lawful permanent residence created by Congress specifically for Afghan nationals who are affiliated with US missions, largely as translators and interpreters. Individuals who qualify for these SIV visas can bring their spouse and children. The eligibility criteria are the individual has to have been employed by or on behalf of the US government in Afghanistan after 2001 or by the International Security Assistance Force for at least 1 year. They do have to get a recommendation letter from their US citizen supervisor, and often a letter from Human Resources is required as well as showing that the individual faces ongoing serious threats because of qualifying work. This is a permanent pathway because it does result in permanent resident status, and permanent residents are eligible also to apply for naturalization and US citizenship. So humanitarian parole is another mechanism through which at-risk individuals can come into the United States in 2 ways. Permanent humanitarian parole applications can be adjudicated for individuals who are abroad by US Citizenship and Immigration Services. This is the same sub-agency of the Department of Homeland Security that also houses the refugee adjudication officers as well as the Asylum Office. So you can apply abroad for humanitarian parole, and you can also request humanitarian parole out of port of entry directly to a Customs and Border Protection official. So there are these 2 pathways. This is a discretionary and case-by-case mechanism for immigration individuals to allow individuals into the country. It's a temporary status. It can include work authorization in the discretion of the Department of Homeland Security, but there's no direct pathway to a green card or lawful permanent residence or eventual citizenship. And of note, there was an August 23, 2021 memo from the Department of Homeland Security that designated parole for a period of 2 years, which is a fairly lengthy amount of time for humanitarian parole on a case-by-case basis for individuals who came over as part of Operation Allies Refuge. And that was the airlifts of Afghan nationals along with others out of Kabul. I did want to talk briefly about options for people already in the United States. The major one would be asylum. So this is for an individual who is already present in the United States or who is arriving to already at a port of entry in the United States with some, I'm going to bracket that if you're at a port of entry, there are expedited procedures that may apply that would limit your ability to access asylum. But for the most part, folks who are in the United States can seek asylum. And this is a status that anybody is eligible to apply for, even if they're in other status, even if they're here on a work visa or other type of visa, or even if they're out of status and undocumented, you are still eligible to apply for asylum. There are some exclusions to asylum. Happy to answer questions as they come up. A big one is if you have a prior deportation order, you're not eligible to apply for asylum. But in general, if you're present here, and especially if you've never had contact with the US immigration system, or your only contact has been through, authorization of a different type of status, you will be eligible to apply. An asylum applicant does become eligible for work authorization, but not right away. They have to wait 180 days after filing their asylum application to apply for work authorization. Asylees can bring spouses and children over, or if their spouse and children are already here in the United States, when the asylum seeker is granted asylum, the spouse and children will get derivative asylee status. Asylum grantees become eligible for a green card after 1 year and for US citizenship after 5 years. And there are 2 ways to apply. So up till now, I've talked about affirmative applications and seeking asylum. That would go to the Department of Homeland Security, US Citizenship and Immigration Services. You can also apply for asylum once you're already in deportation or removal proceedings. So even if you're encountered by ICE and the government is actively trying to deport you, you can at that point still apply for asylum as well. There are other options that may apply to individuals depending on their circumstances. So it's a very quick snapshot that I've given of the major pathways. There are other humanitarian pathways that include U visas for victims of crime or T visas for victims of trafficking. Folks may be eligible for various work visas. They may be eligible for student or scholar visas. If individuals have US citizen or lawful permanent residence here in the United States, they could be eligible for family-based immigration if their relative sponsors them for that. And then other options, included in other options, of course, are also asylum and resettlement in other countries other than the United States. So hope that was helpful. And with that, let's see, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Allison Spade.
Hi, thank you, Eunice. How are you? We are still experiencing some technical difficulties and Atifa is trying very hard to get it to work. Atifa, can you speak now or is it still not?
I can speak, yeah. Can you hear me?
Okay, so we have success, finally.
It's a combination of iPad and my phone. I'm so sorry.
We've had fun trying to get it all together. So I'd like to give a little bit of background and I'm going to try to go through some of the details of how a lot of this came together. As Professor Lee mentioned, I worked on a project called the Afghan Cultural Heritage Education Project. I often call it a CHIP, from 2017 to 2019 as a project manager. And I, gained friends that were colleagues at Kabul University during this time. The project was funded by the National Park Service with pass-through funds from the US Department of State. At the beginning of the Afghan evacuation, I reached out to check with the Kabul University professor that I collaborated with on a regular basis to see how he and his wife and family were doing. And I got a really heartbreaking response. And I've always checked in with him about once a month. He's actually in a European country right now, finishing up his dissertation. And he wrote me, my wife and my children are back in Kabul. They have passports, but I'm not with them. I feel like a horrible husband, a horrible father. And it's really hard to hear that about your colleagues that you've worked closely with for years. And so, I reached out around campus. And I also reached out to the program officers for the National Park Service and also the people I'd met in the Cultural Heritage Task Force at the US Department of State that, were obviously, they were also interested in the project. One program officer immediately sent me the P2 or the Priority 2 visa waiver for Afghan nationals and said your faculty and some of the students would be eligible for these types of visas. So I then started trying to work within the avenues available to me at the university. And then I was fortunate that Colonel Norton, who had met just before COVID, he reached out and asked if we had any people, boots on the ground, and we definitely did. So he and his aide came over immediately and they wrote a support letter, and, that got added to the file for that particular professor. And so I started working with federal relations to work with all the departments across the U of A, and found out, CMES had colleagues who'd worked on other, U Arizona projects and in Afghanistan. So along with the HEP project, there were projects with the library that Atifa can speak to. And I worked with federal relations and colleagues across, including sponsored projects, the School of Government and Public Policy, and also the College of Law. One USAID project, the principal investigator in arid lands retired quite a while ago, and also the USAID project officer had retired too. So one of the things that we needed for that particular USAID application was the grant number. And this was on paper. So I reached out to the assistant director of sponsored projects on the U of A campus. He and his staff went and dug in paper files, and in 2 hours, they got me back that grant number to get that person's P2 application into USAID immediately. So that is the type of support when I've reached out across this campus I've experienced. And federal relations, we compiled a list. We have about 12 different scholars, Afghan scholars that have worked on U Arizona projects. And that's 12 scholars and their families, so all of their dependents. And there's also a wonderful success story. One colleague in School of Government and Public Policy, Javier Osorio Zago, wrote a support letter for a colleague who had worked on a translation project of his. The Afghan colleague had also previously worked with the Afghan digitization project at the U Arizona Library. And he'd also worked on another project, between the U Arizona Library and Kabul University. Well, that colleague and his wife and 2 girls were able to use that support letter to get out. And so they had transferred to Qatar, and from there they've gone to Europe. And so at the previous event that was held by the law school that we were fortunate to co-sponsor, some questions about some of the funding, possibilities came up. Now, CMES has been collecting a lot of the different possibilities for funding, and I'd like to share a bit about those funds. The Scholars at Risk Network is exactly what it says it is, a network. It does not provide funding for Afghan scholars. However, it is able to link up universities interested in a particularly scholarly topic with Afghan scholars in their specialty. Now, there's also the At-Risk Afghan Scholars Fund, funded by the Council of American Overseas Research Centers, which provides visa support and logistics. So that is actually substantial when you start to look at how much some visas cost, and a lot of it is very expensive, and I'm sure Professor Lee can speak to that a bit more. Another fund is the Scholars Rescue Fund. That's the Institute of International Education's Scholar Rescue Fund. The scholar has to apply directly to that fund, and it will provide matching funds to a university, to what a university in America could apply to that particular scholar. So, there are different ways of leveraging funds, and CMES has been doing a lot of research on that. Now, one of the scholar that I mentioned, and I have been fortunate, I worked with Professor Lee and also the Associate Dean of Legal Information about the possibility of hiring one of the Afghan scholars who has worked in legal indexing previously. So there is a possibility there. And now CMES is working on a letter of recommendation about the different funds. And we've also hired an extra pair of hands of one of the graduate student with funds from the provost office to make a lot more of this work happen smoothly. So the grad student is a former social worker and served in the Peace Corps. And we're fortunate she was able to join the team, and she starts this week, and she's going to be in the process of organization. Now, when it comes to the local rescue efforts and the people, the Afghan refugees that are coming into Tucson, I definitely turn this floor over to Atifa. So thank you so much, Atifa.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that I had problem connecting. As Julie said, that we've been working really hard together to really get some of our colleagues out of Afghanistan. And as she indicated, there are several of those people have worked with me on digitization project with ACQU, that's Afghanistan Center at Kabul University. And I've also had another colleague who'd worked with me a couple of years ago. I even forgot about that project. It was to create a digital library at the College of Agriculture at Kabul University. And he and his family are in desperate need of getting out because they work with us, but also he worked with other organizations as well. So he's a very qualified individual. And then another colleague that I'm working with, Julie, and Julia is also who is a very expert in the field of IT and digitization in library management and information. He also worked for 12 years with us with ACQU, and so he's also one of the person that he belonged to a minority group. So I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that we not only have to help these colleagues that they're in danger working with us, but also in lieu of being in a minority group, that really puts them in a harm way. As far as what we're doing with other than the university, I'm pretty much involved with the community also. There are several groups that I've been in touch with, and I'm getting a lot of calls and emails from people in the city of Tucson that they want to bring their families in. A lot of them are looking into the Humanitarian Parole program. Right now, it's a panicking situation for most of them because some of them do have the means to provide some financial obligations, but there are a whole lot of them are themselves on the welfare and other kind of programs that do not qualify for the eligibility for bringing their family members. And so that's a little hardship on their part, but we're trying to work with some local churches, some other local groups in the community to see if anybody can sponsor them, because these are cases that they also need to be getting out. And as far as I understand, the humanitarian parole now has it's much speedy process than any other ones. We also have another group in the community that we're trying to get some of our SIV, because the individual that I'm working with, she was involved with the NATO group and she has a lot of connections. We're working with some activists that they want to get out of Afghanistan. We're also working with other minority groups as well. What City of Tucson is doing is, I was just reading it today too, that they're expecting, especially with one organization, that's the Lutheran Church Services, they're expecting about 25 people coming in mid-October to Tucson area. And most of these, actually all of them, they're about 10 families, so it's 25 individuals. All of them are coming without any kind of form of permanent status. So they have to go through some processing, but they would need a lot of help in the community because they're going to get one-time funding of $1,225. That includes housing as well. So the community has to come together to help this group of people that they need housing, they need transportation, they need people to translate materials for them. They also need clothing, hygiene, and everything else. So I am looking at some other organization in the Phoenix area and Tucson area also if they can help in this this group. But I also understand that Tucson is getting about 1,000, or not Tucson, Arizona is getting 1,600 people altogether. And out of that, there's an estimate of 300 to 500 of them are coming in the southern Arizona areas, which is Tucson is included. So we're getting the 25 now, in October, mid-October, but the other groups that Lutheran Church services, plus the IRC and the refugee services group, they're all working to bring more refugees in the community. So between all three of them, we should have somewhere between 300 to 500, so more like 400 in the process. And they all need people to help them. They need volunteers to help with the language. They need people to provide them cheaper housing, people to really help them in any ways they can help them. The other thing I was going to say is that just it's my plea that, as far as I know, there's about only 65,000 people have come in to the United States, but we have had at least 300,000 affiliation groups of people affiliated with the United States organizations, government entities, and also through with armed services. So you can see we have not gotten some of the most needy that they're in jeopardy. We have not gotten them out. So there's a lot of push on the part of most of us to really get those people that they deserve to come in, because the first group of people came in, they came in with very little documentations and papers, and not necessarily. I don't support them for coming, but they were not the first layer of people that they should have been in the United States. So that's my plea, that we need to continue our effort, because there's an awful lot of people left in Afghanistan that they need to be out. There's human crisis happening in Afghanistan, and it's getting worse. The inside country it's a catastrophe. There's COVID, there's poverty, there's unemployment, there's migration, it's the displacement, mistrust of the different ethnic groups. Of course, the emergence of Taliban is added to all of this, and so it's a humanitarian crisis, and it needs all of our help. I guess if there's any question later on, I'd be glad to answer.
Thank you so much. Colonel Norton.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to take a couple minutes and just kind of tee up myself and Colonel Jones a little bit. We're trying to get out and about more on the university. I've been here 2 years now, and obviously last year with COVID, things were, it was hard to get out and meet people and get involved with other departments on campus. And so this is a small attempt with my coordination with Julie over at CMES to try and get out more, and because I think we've got a lot to offer in the ROTC involvement, whether it be in school of public policy, Middle Eastern studies, or the law school, or the history department, and this is a good start this evening. Not only for the ROTC, but the Veterans Affairs involvement with Bruce Grissom up there at the Veterans Center. The veterans on campus have a lot to offer educational wise, and to insert themselves in the discussions we're having both academically and just the experiences they've had. And I think the more we get involved, the better. I find that we're inherently stuck in stovepipes, not just because of COVID, just because we're stuck in stovepipes doing our job. So anything you guys that are putting this together tonight, if you want to volunteer us, continue to volunteer us and get us involved, and we'll do the same. My personal experience in Afghanistan was really 13 months, and it was an experience I'll never forget. And I fell in love with the Afghan people and the country. And I would argue that, like most Marines that went over there, we felt like we were doing something positive, and we don't write policy, but we execute at the tactical level with our Afghan partners. In this case, for myself and a lot of my peers, with the Afghan military and police. So 24/7, I lived it for 13 months, and I don't think I would have been successful without my really the friends I made, and a little bit of luck as well, but my guest tonight that I've invited, maybe I kind of coerced him into joining us, is he was my linguist and my cultural advisor, and he's an Afghan. So what better person to have on this panel tonight than an actual Afghan that just got out of Afghanistan for his entire adult life. He's lived there. So even though he's a U.S. citizen now, Wafa and I spent 13 months together in Helmand. But really, when you think about the last 20 years in Afghanistan and U.S. involvement, Wafa lived it personally day in and day out. And to risk to him and his family, the job he did over there. And so he is like one of many Afghan linguists that helped us. And he's also a patriot within his own country. So I told him I wouldn't put the pressure on him to say anything, but if anybody's got any questions for him after I'm done speaking, he can chime in. And he perhaps is the best one to answer some of the questions. Similar to Julie, we got a couple folks out, Wafa's family, who was literally in that crowd outside the airport. Wafa fought through that crowd 2 weeks ago, and it's a dangerous situation, as Atifa just talked about. It's a very dangerous situation, and it's going to continue to be dangerous. Some perspectives and just general perspectives. To say Afghanistan, or like most topics we probably wrestle with concerning what the military gets involved with, it's complex. And so I've got one side of my brain always, that's the humanitarian side, and we need to help these people. And we have a responsibility, especially now that the Taliban's taken over, to get folks that helped us out. That's the way I feel about it. And I don't think you can talk to another person that served in Afghanistan, whether it be with the State Department or with NGOs or with the military, that says we don't have an obligation to help those that helped us. And so that's the way I feel about it. And obviously, my perspective is not the perspective of policy or DOD or the Marine Corps or Navy. It's my personal perspective. And so I'm obligated to say that. I think we have an obligation to help those that helped us. And I think that for folks like Wafa, we absolutely were involved in a country and created hope in a country the way we hoped it would turn out. And obviously, at this point, it's not looking good. I also would tell you that from my perspective, I get the other side of the argument. America does not want to be involved in endless wars. We don't want to be the police force for the world. And as history moves on, things change perspectives. If we think back to September 11th, 2001, we had a much different feeling in this country. And 20 years later, after all the complexities of getting involved with counterinsurgency and in a country that we're trying to change its culture in some ways, there's no doubt about it. And it's hard, it's not easy. And there's only so many resources to do that. And so, again, that's why I say it's complex. I get the other side of the argument. I think the oversimplification of Afghan policy, probably until the last year or so, was the oversimplification would have been, do we leave a small footprint there to help the Afghan military and governance to continue to work and keep the Taliban from taking over at bay? Or do we pull everybody out and say, wait, we're not going to be involved in an endless war? I could easily make an argument on either case, and that's why I think it's obviously complex. The case to stay over there, in my humble opinion, would be not only for Afghanistan, but for having a footprint in that region of the world. I have no doubt in my military mind that there's a lot of advisors that advised our political leaders that, hey, it's probably smart to keep people there with a small footprint, because not only is Afghanistan there, but Pakistan's there, Iran's there, and to just pull out completely, that may not be the wisest decision. But obviously, when politics are involved, and I get the other side of the argument as well. And so that's why political leaders get paid to make decisions, and they get elected and they make decisions. I think we would be naive to not at least understand that there's a realpolitik involved here. You know, a gentleman by the name of Henry Kissinger wrote a book on diplomacy, and he talked about this concept of realpolitik, which is essentially a system of politics and principles based on practical things rather than moral and ideological considerations. And I think there's got to be truth to that as well. Countries act in their own best interest. I think we realize that because there's only so many resources, and politicians make decisions in order to, oftentimes, my cynical side would say, to get reelected. And ultimately, that's what makes things so complex. And that's why I say I got half my brain that thinks one way and half my brain that thinks another way. I think if you look back in history, and I'll shut up after this, sometimes we get involved in situations and we back certain situations that we don't have all the information, and I don't think you ever will have all the information. I think particularly the US military, I'm probably sounding like a homer here, but we do the best we can with the situation we've got, and I think everybody's trying to do the right thing, from the State Department all the way through the military. So I'll end on that and pass it over to Wafa if he wants to say anything.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So my name is Mushtaba Wafa. I was born in Panjshir Valley, north of Afghanistan. I'm married. I have 3 kids. They're all US citizen. So my wife is the only one. She's a green card holder, and the rest of the family just got evacuated about 3 weeks ago. So they don't have any sort of US documentation yet. But I'm glad we're just out of this chaos, and I just barely made it through thousands of crowds trying to push to the gates and trying to get out. So I'm pleased to be here with this at this moment, and I'd like to thank Colonel Norton for his efforts that made this possible for my family to get out of Afghanistan on August 19, which was a very historical day for me, to get him out very quickly. And they were one of the lucky ones. So, and I appreciate everybody's comments in here in Afghanistan, and I'm ready to answer any questions if you have. I have worked starting late 2004 to all the way 2018, actually. My recent assignment was with RS headquarters, and we were supporting Afghan Ministry of Defense on their procurement and logistical support systems. So I have worked from a platoon level all the way to strategic level at the ministerial level. So I have plenty of experience on working with the US military, with the NATO and other countries. So I'm glad to be here, and if there's any question, I will be more than glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, last but not least, we have Colonel Jones.
Thank you, Eunice. I really appreciate the invitation, and thanks again to Colonel Norton for tying us in. And to echo a couple of the comments he said is we are certainly looking to integrate with the other departments and the university in the best, any way that we possibly can. And I appreciate you inviting me to participate. I also want to echo that the opinions I'm going to share with you, for the most part, are mine alone and not the United States Air Force or ROTC in general. My experience with Afghanistan began in early 2002. I was deployed to both support Operation Southern Watch in Southern Iraq, and then over when Enduring Freedom first kicked off. So in that capacity, I was flying during Operation Anaconda. Many of you have heard of that from the tragedy that we had with Roberts Ridge, and that was my Strike Eagle squadron. At that time, I was a weapons systems officer flying in the backseat of a Strike Eagle. Fast forward to 2011, and I was stationed with the Joint Operations Center in Bagram for 6 months and working primarily with the Army and some of our coalition partners in the busiest region in Afghanistan. And it was a pretty difficult year in 2011, after Operation Neptune Spear and being able to take out Osama bin Laden, there was a lot of kick up in the operations there. So that was a pretty interesting time to be there. As I've moved on, however, I have not been back to Afghanistan since 2011, and my training has all been in strategy. So from a grand strategy perspective, looking over the last 20 years, and I had a very different opinion at 9/11. I had a very unpopular opinion after 9/11 that in order to take out terrorist strongholds, you don't need to occupy a country. And I know that is not a very popular view in the military, but whenever we have boots on the ground, our investment and our ability to remove ourselves from military involvements is very difficult. And I find that we've been somewhat haphazard as a country in using our military in ways where our diplomacy perhaps has failed. As a result of that, our objectives and overall strategic goals in Afghanistan changed over time. And what I've seen and what I've experienced, especially with the military members that have been there, is an absolute purity in their intentions and the unbelievable sacrifice of many Afghans like Mr. Wafa, who in the best interest of their own countries risked their own safety to be able to enable what our new strategic goals had become over that time. In order to end a war that was costing a great deal of money is a difficult decision to make. And so I am in fact in agreement that we should end that. I have opinions on how we could have possibly done that a little bit more seamlessly and with a little less loss of life, or at least danger to the many people that are still there. But from a broader perspective, I'll just track that the role of the military, especially the US Air Force, has shifted very greatly in the last couple of months. So where we were doing primarily armed overwatch and support to staff on the ground, et cetera, that has shifted to airlift and humanitarian support. And as was mentioned, the operation, the OAR that they're calling it, has gotten out 124,000 people in just 17 days. And that is it's hard to put that into perspective. That is by far the largest non-combatant evacuation effort that we have ever accomplished in the Air Force. And essentially, if you take into account that there's only 222 C-17s in the Air Force, and at any given day across the globe, only 60 of them are operating, during that period of time, anywhere from 60 to 113 of them were operating in the Central Command area of responsibility. So a exponential increase and surge of operations in order to do that. In fact, they even broke some records with the fact that at one time they even had 823 people on just one aircraft, which I won't go into details, but it's not within our normal regulations to allow that many people. Now it's even shifted more, and we're providing medical support. The latest release from the Air Force is that they're doing vaccinations in Ramstein and Rhine Ordnance Barracks in Germany to get after preparing many of these families to be able to come over to the United States and provide them the health support that they need so they are not at risk themselves or at risk to the United States as they come over. So as of yesterday, the release that they provided, they estimate approximately 9,000 families are still in Germany awaiting transfer over to the US. I'm absolutely happy to answer any questions that might come up, but I did want to share one thing. I reached out to a friend of mine who's a squadron commander in one of those C-17 squadrons, and they were willing to share with me, and I'll share with you this short statement. I was completely blown away by how much everyone stepped up and performed together. We operated on true mission type orders. Our crews, maintainers, Raven, security forces, support agencies. Everyone went above and beyond anything I'd ever seen. There were lots of challenges and things we can do better, but I've never been more proud of our airmen. They went on to discuss some of the difficulties and seeing how heart-wrenching it was to not be able to provide more in order to get families out. And they ended with, so many families have a hard road ahead of them, but I'm proud to be a small part of giving them a better chance. So on that, I'll turn it back over to you and happy to answer any questions. Thanks for letting me participate.
Thank you so much, Colonel Jones, and all of our speakers. So I wanted to open it up. We have just a few minutes left if there are audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand or you can type it in chat.
There is one in chat about the Lutheran church services. Is it going to take more Afghan refugees than IRC? Atifa, do you know for Tucson?
Yes, they are. They are talking about taking at least 100 people, more people in after October. Yes, they are taking people.
No, but they're asking if they're taking more than the IRC is going to. I don't know what the IRC number
that I don't
was.
know. That I don't know. I think they don't even know that themselves, because everybody's first coming into the bases in Phoenix, and then from there they'll disperse them to other places. So they don't know how many people will end up being. But both agencies are working really hard to have equal numbers.
We do have an additional question in the chat about whether, how can Tucson and U of A find out the specialties and interests of our newest members of the community, and how can we, the community, help them find employment or entrepreneur opportunities where they will thrive? So, Julie or Atifa, is there a centralized or Colonel Norton or any others, Colonel Jones, Mr. Wapa, is there any infrastructure here at the U of A through which some of this might be centralized?
That's
well, I can talk about that. I think some of the people that we have really taking their cases, they're all qualified to be employed at the University of Arizona. If not at the university, maybe someplace else in the city of Tucson. But they have a pretty good qualification that they could really start their jobs if there are openings right away. And they don't have any difficulty with the language. They don't have any difficulty with adjusting to the community because they're all coming from an academic environment, and they've been working with other NGOs and also with other U.S. entities. So I think they're ready to go, and we're ready for them. Julie could answer that too.
I just want to make sure that I have the question completely correct. You're asking about the possibility of helping people
employment
with employment. We're still working on a lot of recommendations and trying to collate all the resources that have come our way. And I know that there's different organizations around the community, that Atifa has mentioned, the International Rescue Committee and Lutheran Church Services. But with employment at the U of A right now, we are supposed to be working with Federal Relations and UA Global on that. And now that we're going to be employing a grad student worker who will be helping, we'll have more answers. So if people want to email me, I would be better able to answer that in the next couple of weeks. My email address, I've already put it in the chat once, and my email is Jellison, JELLISON @arizona.edu. So I'm sorry I don't have a clearer answer right now, but that, feel free to reach out.
But Julie, also we need to mention that ASU has a program now for scholars, and it's a program at ASU, and people with qualification and with green card or even the process of green card could apply for that. But Julie is looking into seeing what could be done with them as well.
So there is another, another question in the chat, interest in volunteering, also a question about services that will be needed for children, refugees who bring their children, and where there's what schools they'll be attending. I think, we're just about out of time, but Julie did leave her email in the chat. I will leave mine also. I think that, in terms of volunteer opportunities, there will be a lot. There's also a comment in the chat, a response about volunteering directly with one of the local resettlement agencies. Two that have been mentioned already are the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, as well as Lutheran Social Services. So if you go to their webpage, there will likely be instructions for directly volunteering with those organizations as well. And with that, we are out of time. So I do want to just close by thanking again all of our speakers who've gathered here today, as well as all of the audience members for attending this event, and especially our co-sponsors, CMES, UAROTC, for not just sponsoring this event, but all the work you've been doing, and Mr. Rafa, Ms. Ron, for sharing your experiences and your perspectives. So with that, I think we will close the event there. But again, thanks so much to everybody for coming and for being a part of this important discussion.